Let's start with a simple truth that neuroscience keeps reaffirming: your brain is not fixed. It's not a static organ that you're born with and stuck with forever. It's constantly reshaping itself moment by moment, experience by experience. This process is called neuroplasticity, and it's the foundation for everything we mean when we talk about rebuilding yourself. Every thought you think, every habit you repeat, every emotion you engage with, they're not abstract events happening in some invisible mental space. They're physical events. They leave traces in your neural circuitry. When you think a certain way repeatedly, neurons fire together and wire together. That's not just a catchy phrase. It's a biological law of learning. The more those circuits fire, the stronger the connections become. And eventually, that thought pattern becomes who you are, or more precisely, who you believe you are. But here's the beautiful and liberating side of that. Those same circuits can be reshaped. The same mechanism that created your current identity can be used to construct a new one. The science of rebuilding yourself starts with the recognition that identity is plastic, not permanent. The brain's architecture is adaptable, and that means you're adaptable. You're not a prisoner of your past wiring. You're the engineer of your future one. Now, neuroplasticity doesn't happen automatically. It's not just a matter of wanting change or thinking positively. Your brain changes when two things converge: attention as emotion. What you focus on and how emotionally charged that focus is determines what your brain decides is important enough to rewire. If you repeat something mindlessly, your brain doesn't care. But if you engage with deep focus, if your emotions are activated, whether it's excitement, determination, or even pain, that's when your nervous system wakes up and says, this matters. Let's adapt. That's why the most transformative moments in life often come from challenge or discomfort. Stress, when used correctly, is a signal for growth. It's the biological invitation for neuroplasticity. When you step into an unfamiliar environment, try a new skill, or face a difficult truth about yourself, your brain enters a heightened state of alertness, a readiness to learn. That's not weakness. That's the nervous system opening a window for change. The problem is, most people retreat the moment that window opens. They interpret discomfort as danger rather than as opportunity. But if you can stay in it consciously, deliberately, you're teaching your brain that growth is safe. Think about it. Every skill you've ever learned, walking, reading, speaking, driving, started with friction. At first, it felt awkward and uncertain. Then, through repetition, the brain made it automatic. Rebuilding yourself follows the same principle. At the start, the new behaviors or thoughts feel foreign, even fake. But with consistency and attention, they become part of your neural landscape. The unfamiliar becomes familiar. That's how you evolve. From a neuroscience perspective, this process is deeply tied to dopamine, the molecule of motivation and reward. Many people misunderstand dopamine. They think it's about pleasure. It's not. Dopamine is about pursuit. It's released when you anticipate a meaningful outcome, not when you achieve it. That means your brain is designed to reward you for taking action toward change, not just for finishing it. So when you take a small step toward rebuilding yourself, waking up earlier, journaling, exercising, saying no to distractions, your brain releases a bit of dopamine. It's the nervous system's way of saying, keep going. You're on the right track. But there's another layer here, one that's both scientific and philosophical. Rebuilding yourself isn't about becoming someone else. It's about uncovering the deeper potential of who you already are. The brain's plasticity is neutral. It doesn't care whether you use it to reinforce self-doubt or build resilience. You are shaping it every day, consciously or unconsciously. The question is whether you're doing it with intention. When you start aligning your focus, emotions, and actions toward a vision of who you want to become, you're giving your nervous system a clear blueprint. Over time, the brain rewires to support that identity. You begin to notice opportunities that match it. You filter out distractions that don't, and your body, through hormonal and neural feedback, starts to align with the new pattern. That's not motivation, that's biology doing its job. This is where science meets spirituality in the most practical way. The mind and body are not separate, they're parts of the same adaptive system. Your thoughts sculpt your brain, and your brain, in turn, shapes your experience of life. When you change one, you inevitably change the other. That's why rebuilding yourself starts inside. in the neural circuits that determine what you notice, how you react, and what you believe is possible. If you take away one truth from this, let it be this: you are not a finished product. You are a living, breathing work in progress, sculpted by every experience, every thought, every moment of awareness. The science is clear. You can rewire your mind. But the choice to do it, the commitment to stay with it through discomfort and doubt, that's on you. Neuroplasticity gives you the potential. Discipline turns it into transformation. And if you're willing to direct your focus toward growth, engage your emotions in that process, and repeat it with intention, your brain, your entire self will follow, because rebuilding yourself isn't a one-time act. It's a daily practice, a conscious decision to evolve. Discipline is one of those words that can make people tense up. It sounds rigid, almost cold, like something that strips life of spontaneity. But from a scientific standpoint, discipline isn't about restriction. It's about structure, and structure is what allows the nervous system to thrive. In fact, the brain doesn't perform best in chaos or randomness. It performs best when it can predict patterns, when it knows what to expect, and when to act. This is where the difference between motivation and discipline becomes critical. Motivation is emotional. It's that spark of inspiration you feel after watching a powerful video, reading a quote, or hearing something that stirs you. But the brain isn't wired to sustain that feeling indefinitely. Motivation is driven largely by dopamine spikes, short-term chemical bursts that fade when the reward isn't immediately available. It's volatile. Discipline, on the other hand, is the neural mechanism that turns that initial spark into consistent, goal-directed behavior. It's not about how you feel. It's about what you do repeatedly until it becomes who you are. From a neuroscience perspective, discipline relies on circuits in the prefrontal cortex, the region of the brain responsible for decision-making, impulse control, and long-term planning. This part of the brain acts like a conductor, managing impulses from the limbic system, the emotional brain, and directing behavior toward what you've decided matters most. When you engage discipline, you're essentially strengthening those prefrontal pathways. You're training your brain to act in alignment with intention rather than emotion. The challenge is that discipline doesn't feel rewarding at first. The early stages of building it are uncomfortable precisely because your brain is being rewired. The dopamine system is shifting its association away from the immediate gratification of doing what's easy and toward the deeper satisfaction of doing what's meaningful. The friction you feel is not failure, it's the biological signature of growth. This is why disciplined people often appear calm, even when facing stress. Their brains have learned to regulate the internal dialogue between emotion and logic. When you practice discipline consistently, waking up early, training when you don't feel like it, focusing when your mind wants to wander, you are reinforcing a loop of self-trust. You're teaching your nervous system that it can depend on you. And self-trust is the foundation of mental strength. There's an important misconception here. People often think discipline kills creativity. It's actually the opposite. The most creative, productive individuals in any field, athletes, scientists, musicians, writers, rely heavily on discipline. Why? Because discipline reduces decision fatigue. When certain actions become automatic, your cognitive resources are freed for higher level thinking. Routine becomes a platform for innovation. You can't reach flow states, those deeply immersive moments of creativity and focus, without structure first. Flow is built on repetition, on doing the same thing so often that your brain no longer resists it. And this connects beautifully to the biology of progress. Every time you complete a disciplined action, even a small one, the brain releases a small amount of dopamine. This isn't the euphoric kind that comes from a big win. It's a subtler, steadier form of reward. It tells your brain, you did what you said you would do. That signal strengthens the association between effort and satisfaction. Over time, your brain begins to crave the act of consistency itself. The process becomes its own source of pleasure. That's when discipline stops feeling like work and starts feeling like alignment. But discipline is not just a neurological process. It's deeply philosophical. It's about who you choose to be in the moments when no one is watching. It's about reclaiming agency over your own mind. Most of what people call procrastination or lack of motivation is really just a lack of clarity. When you know exactly what matters to you, and when you attach emotion to that clarity, discipline stops being punishment. it becomes an act of devotion. You're no longer forcing yourself to do something. You're aligning with the person you want to become. And yet discipline will always involve resistance. There's no escaping that. Every time you face it, the brain will whisper, just this once, it doesn't matter. But that moment, that micro decision, is the training ground for your future self. Every time you override that impulse, you're strengthening the neural pathways of resilience. You're telling your brain, we do what's necessary, not what's comfortable. And slowly, those small victories compound into something profound: confidence. Confidence, from a neurobiological lens, is not self-belief that appears magically. It's the accumulation of evidence that you can rely on yourself. And that evidence is built through disciplined action. Every time you follow through on a promise to yourself, no matter how small, you reinforce that identity. You shift from, I wish I could, to, I am someone who does. That shift is the essence of rebuilding, not chasing fleeting motivation, but constructing an internal architecture of consistency. So the question becomes, what are you training your brain to expect from you? Because your nervous system is always learning. If you skip the workout, avoid the challenge, or break the promise, your brain logs that too. It's not judging you, it's recording patterns. It adapts to whatever you repeatedly do. And that's the ultimate truth about discipline. You don't rise to the level of your goals. You fall to the level of your systems. If you want to rebuild yourself, build systems that align with your values, systems that make the right actions easier and the wrong ones harder. Don't depend on fleeting bursts of motivation. Depend on the biology of habit, the psychology of consistency, and the philosophy of self-respect. Because discipline isn't about control, it's about liberation. It's the freedom that comes from knowing you can rely on yourself, no matter how you feel, no matter what's happening around you. And when that level of self-trust is built into your nervous system, you stop chasing motivation altogether. You simply become the person who acts. At some point, everyone reaches a stage where rebuilding isn't just about changing habits or routines. It's about changing who you believe yourself to be. That's where the real transformation happens. Because beneath all the neural rewiring and disciplined behavior lies something deeper. Your emotional identity, the biological and psychological patterns that shape how you experience the world and how you see yourself within it. Emotions are not abstract forces. They are chemical signals, measurable shifts in your internal state created by neurochemistry. When you feel fear, anger, love, or joy, your brain releases neurotransmitters and hormones like cortisol, adrenaline, dopamine, and serotonin. These chemicals change how your body feels, how your heart beats, how your lungs draw air. In other words, your emotions are not just felt, they are embodied. And over time, repeated emotional states form patterns that the nervous system learns to expect. This is what neuroscientists refer to as emotional conditioning. If your brain and body have spent years reacting with stress, defensiveness, or self-doubt, those emotional circuits become the default. The same applies to confidence, calm, and gratitude. Whatever you repeat becomes who you are. So when we talk about rebuilding yourself, we're really talking about reconditioning your emotional patterns. You're not just changing what you do, you're teaching your nervous system to live in a different emotional landscape. This is why rebuilding is often so uncomfortable at first. When you begin to shift your inner state, your biology resists. The body craves familiarity, even if that familiarity is rooted in stress or pain. Your nervous system equates the known with the safe. That's why people often return to old habits or relationships that don't serve them, not because they lack willpower, but because their body has memorized those emotions as home. The work of transformation then is to expand your sense of safety, to teach your body that calm, focus, and self-belief are just as familiar as chaos once was. The science of emotional regulation shows that this shift begins with awareness. You can't change what you don't notice. The moment you can observe your emotional response without immediately reacting to it, you've already created space for choice. That's the moment when the prefrontal cortex steps in, interrupting the old emotional loop. Practices like deep breathing, mindfulness, or even brief moments of deliberate stillness activate the parasympathetic nervous system, the rest and repair network, lowering cortisol levels and signaling safety to the body. But emotional resetting isn't only about calming down, it's about redirecting energy. When you experience an emotion intensely, especially a difficult one, there's a surge of physiological arousal. Heart rate increases, attention narrows, the body prepares for action. If that energy is suppressed, it becomes internalized stress. But if it's consciously channeled through breathwork, movement, reflection, or expression, it becomes fuel for transformation. That's how you turn pain into progress. And here's where identity enters the equation. Every time you experience emotion, your brain is updating its model of who you are. If you consistently respond to challenge with composure, your identity shifts toward resilience. If you repeatedly affirm your ability to adapt, your neural circuitry begins to reflect that belief. This is not just positive thinking, it's biology. The insula, a region of the brain involved in self-awareness, literally maps your internal state. As you change your emotional responses, you're remodeling your sense of self at the neural level. That's why visualization and self-reflection are so powerful when paired with action. When you vividly imagine your future self, not as fantasy, but as possibility, your brain begins to simulate that identity. It fires the same neural networks that would activate if that version of you already existed. Combine that mental rehearsal with disciplined behavior, and you create a feedback loop the mind envisions. The body acts, the brain rewires. Over time, identity becomes reality. This is where science meets philosophy again. Rebuilding yourself is not about erasing who you've been. It's about integrating your past experiences into a more evolved version of yourself. The parts of you that struggled, that failed, that hurt, those aren't weaknesses. They're raw material. They hold emotional data, signals that, when understood, become wisdom. The goal isn't to suppress emotion, but to refine your relationship with it. Think about it, emotion is energy in motion. The moment you stop resisting it, it begins to move, to change form. That's why forgiveness feels like a physical release, why acceptance brings clarity, and why purpose brings energy. These aren't metaphors, they're neurochemical realities. When you shift your emotional baseline from fear and reactivity to calm and agency, you change the chemical composition of your life. You become, quite literally, a different biological being, one who is attuned to growth rather than protection. But none of this happens passively. It's a daily practice of noticing your state, regulating your reactions, and aligning your choices with the person you're becoming. It's not glamorous. It's not loud. It's quiet, deliberate, and deeply internal. You breathe differently. You speak to yourself differently. You move through the world differently. And slowly, your biology follows suit. What makes this process profound is that it reconnects you to something that's always been true. That you are not your emotions, you are the awareness behind them. You are not your past, you are the consciousness capable of shaping what comes next. So when you rebuild yourself emotionally, you're not escaping who you were. You're reclaiming the authority to decide who you'll be. You're teaching your nervous system that peace is not a reward, it's a skill. And that skill becomes the foundation of everything else you build. Because at the end of the day, rebuilding yourself is not just psychological or physical, it's biological. Every breath, every thought, every emotion is part of that architecture.